what? Let's see. So tonight's keynote presentation is about long-term rentals, maximizing long-term returns with short-term rentals, pardon me. And guys, if you have the Quest orange sheet, I think there's only 5 things to fill out on there. So if you will fill out those 5 things and fill it out now so that they can spend a little bit of time with their family tonight, what they'll do is they'll call you tomorrow so you can have more of a one-on-one conversation with them. Everyone's self-directed IRA is a little bit different. Some people need 5-minute conversations. Some people need 55-minute conversations. But if you'll fill those out, we'll get those picked up right now so you guys can make sure and get contacted tomorrow. So short-term rentals in Austin has always been a very hot topic, specifically legislatively, with how the city of Austin has made some changes to curtail our ability to have short-term rentals. So we'll talk about that strategy. It's very interesting because when you hear about short-term rentals and when you see the TV shows, everything looks so fun, everything looks so easy, everything looks so profitable. It's like a win-win all the way around. But when you actually implement that strategy specifically here in Austin, well, that's not exactly the case. The Austin TV show would be very different, obviously, than than a national show. This is urgent.
Yes.
Okay. Everybody please say hello to my son, Zilker Grove, who has an urgent emergency. What's up?
Somebody was putting.
I know. Yeah, I know.
I know.
Is that right? That's funny. Are you going home, Dave?
No, yet.
Okay. All right. Go to work. So it's very different in terms of the execution and the implementation here in Austin than it is in many of the other communities in Texas as well as nationally. I'll tell you that if you think the city of Austin is bad when it comes to short-term rentals and legislating short-term rentals, let me tell you that the city of Fort Worth has actually outlawed short-term rentals entirely. Okay, so once you get that perspective, right? So perspective is key for everything that we do. Once you get that perspective, then you realize, well, Austin isn't that bad, right? But we'll go through what some of those restrictions are, so you can be aware of those as well. So for us, the way that we think about short-term rentals in general is not just with the strategy of using short-term rentals, but with the sort of overarching umbrella strategy, if you will, or the foundational strategy, if you will, of just owning rental property here in Austin. What's the biggest benefit of owning rental property here in Austin? You come on in. What's the biggest benefit of owning rental property here in Austin? It's the appreciation. It's the appreciation. And a lot of people are socialized, and I was socialized this way myself when I first started investing in real estate, and the idea that everything was about cash flow. Come on in. Yeah, come on in. It's standing room only, as it turns out. So, but I was steeped in the idea of cash flow. But once you start really investing in the city of Austin, you realize that cash flow in Austin is kind of an oxymoron, right? These things go together like oil and water. It's very difficult to cash flow when the value of your property, if you're in the city of Austin, is at least $350,000 and higher. Because as the values go up, for example, on a 45-degree angle, your rents start to level off, right? You get a little bit of diminishing marginal returns on those rents. So if you have a lower end house, and this is not an Austin house, just want to use this as an example, but for example, Taylor, one of these outlying cities, you might buy a $100,000 house that you're able to rent for $1,200 a month. So your monthly rent is roughly 1.2% of the total value of that house. But when you get into the city of Austin and you're looking at a $300,000 house, are you getting for a $300,000 house $3,600 or even $3,000 a month in rent? No, you're going to be lucky if you're getting probably $2,000 a month in rent, right? And as the value goes up to $500,000, are you getting $5,000 a month in rent? No, you're going to be lucky if you're getting somewhere between $2,500 and $3,000. So that's where you get that leveling off. And that's why I say for many cases in the city of Austin, cash flow in Austin is kind of an oxymoron. You don't really see that. And a lot of investors are so in their minds stuck on this idea of, and I understand it, but cash flow. Like they think I buy rental property so I can get cash flow. In San Antonio, I think that is exactly right? Where the values in San Antonio are much lower. But in the city of Austin, it's very difficult, again, to be able to work that. But what's different about the city of Austin versus the city of San Antonio, as an example, is in Austin, you're going to get incredible amounts of appreciation. So while you might not be making $100 to $300 a month every month in cash flow, don't worry about it. And by the way, nobody feels sorry for you because the value of your property is going up somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 or $30,000 every year. So that appreciation really, and what my experience has been investing in this city for the last 16 years, is that appreciation dwarfs that cash flow. If you're looking for cash flow and you're looking for $500 a month in cash flow, just let's do some quick math here. $500 a month in cash flow, which most people would say that's pretty good cash flow. The math, as it works out, is that's $6,000 a year. What can you do in real estate to make $6,000 a year in cash flow, which is taxable income at your income tax rate? You could do a wholesale and get $6,000, right? Except with a wholesale, you never own the property. You don't have to have insurance on the property. You don't have to deal with tenants. You don't have to deal with toilets. And you don't have to deal with the things that tenants put in toilets, right? Wouldn't you rather focus instead on the properties that are appreciating? So I see a lot of investors who will say, like, I can't cash flow in Austin, so I'm going to go out to these outlying cities. Well, these outlying cities, they're not going to make you rich through that appreciation. It's the city of Austin that will make you rich through the appreciation. So we call any buy and hold real estate strategy, again, specifically for here, a great way to get rich slow. Okay? It doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time, but it does happen in a really big way. So for me, and my husband Phil, we started investing here in the city of Austin in 2003. What do you think has happened with the value of our assets? They've gone up substantially. And I'll tell you, people will think that, well, you got all these assets, like you probably have great cash flow. No, we have terrible cash flow. Why is that? Because we're in the city of Austin. And because as values go up, cash flows level out. Does anybody feel sorry for me? I'm not cash flowing, like I'm not making it. No, because I'm getting rich, right? But I want you guys to change the way that you look at owning rental properties, and again, focus on what we have here in Austin, which is that appreciation. Again, if we were in San Antonio, we would be having a very different conversation right now. But one of the things that we like to say is this is Texans teaching Texans how to invest in Texas using strategies that work in Texas. If we were in Cincinnati, Ohio, right? If I were one of the gurus who actually put little flyers on all the cars in the parking lot out there tonight, who's coming here from out of state, guess what they would say? They would say cash flow is everything, but they don't live here. They don't invest here. They don't know how to build wealth here. I live here, I invest here, I know how to build wealth here. Now, that being said, we're going to teach you guys how to get cash flow, incredible amounts of cash flows from your rentals here in Austin. But again, this is what we find is that most investors specifically are focusing on that cash flow, but that's not the best part of owning rental property here in Austin. You get the tax advantages when you have any buy and hold investment, so you get to depreciate your improvement, meaning you get to depreciate the house. You cannot depreciate the land. That's the only thing that they don't allow you to depreciate. But you get to depreciate that improvement. What's cool about that, and so this is where I have to say, I'm not an attorney, CPA, or financial planner, or accountant, or any of those things, but I have been making payments to the IRS and creating a tax return for my real estate investment business for the last 16 years. So what I can tell you about depreciation, why it's so beautiful, is depreciation is what's called a non-cash expense. So it's an expense that you get to take to reduce your taxable income, to reduce the taxes that you pay, but you don't have to pay anyone for that expense. Whereas, for example, if you replace carpet in a house, that is a taxable expense as well, except you had to pay someone for that. Now, when you go to resell your rental properties, you do have to pay back what's called depreciation recapture. But you're not recapturing the full 100% in depreciation that you took off on that property. You're only recapturing at a rate of 25%, okay? So that's a big benefit to us for anyone who owns a property for over a year. Leverage, when we're buying rental property, we're using either bank's money or we're buying using the subject to the existing financing strategy. So if you guys have not really familiar with that, that's something that we're going to talk about as we go through our 3-day training as well. And again, remember that appreciation is the key to making all of this work, again, specifically here in Austin. That's the thing that's going to pay you the most as long as you buy it right. So a lot of investors will come here, they have the right idea, I want to buy rental property, but they have terrible execution. They buy rental properties in areas where you're not seeing properties appreciate in value. You want to buy in the city of Austin where the values are appreciating. The state of Texas averages a 5.7% appreciation rate, and that includes places like the sticks, right? So just the city of Austin is a much more significant appreciation rate, especially when you compound it over the last several years. What savvy investors do is they focus on those properties that are appreciating, those properties that are doubling in value every 5 to 15 years, right? The better properties happen quicker. The worser properties, you know what I'm saying, okay? Those happen a little bit slower. And what's also great about appreciation is that it is a fantastic hedge against inflation. So as you have that inflation, what do you see happen with the rents? The rents start to go up, but what happens with your mortgage payment, assuming that you have a fixed rate mortgage? It stays exactly the same. So as we have inflation, which we have not had any real significant inflation for at least the last 10 years, even though they've been saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, we have been probably in the 2-ish plus or minus 1% inflation range. But as we get more inflation, those rents start to pop up and your monthly mortgage stays the same, which is that opportunity to get that cash flow that many of us are looking for. We focus specifically on areas that are growing in population. Is that the city of Austin? The answer is yes. So that one of the reasons why we keep you guys here until 9 o'clock at night is because we want to keep you away from all of the people that are moving here and who have just put it in park on I-35 waiting for you to get out of this meeting. So we focus on areas, again, more people are moving in than people are moving out. We focus on areas where there's not room for new construction. What does that mean? Again, that means the areas that are closer to town. So as you guys drive outside of the city limits, do you see buildings that are 20, 30 stories high? Or do you see buildings that are long and low and flat and take up all this real estate, right? As you get further away from the city, the value of the land in terms of $1 per acre usually starts to go down. And that is evidenced by the fact that people will build these long and low buildings. When you look at something that's downtown, for example, the only way to be able to get a return on your investment is to go up, right? So you want to look for areas where people are having to go up when it comes to building new properties, right? Focus on the dirt, not the house. So this is kind of an interesting concept. Some of the rental properties that we own, for example, if you just look at the house, you're going to probably say, wow, that is a real shit box. And these are some of the properties that Phil and I own. They look terrible from the street, right? But what's beautiful about these properties is the land upon which these houses are sitting on. Yeah, the shit box that's on it now, in 5 or 10 or 15 years, whenever we decide to redevelop that property, what are we going to do? We're going to haul that thing off to the dump, right? And we're going to build that property to its best and highest use at what time that we decide to go and rebuild that property. So that's how we think about these. We don't think about necessarily the fact that, man, this is not a very attractive looking house. We focus on the dirt. That's our biggest concern as we are selecting the properties that we want. What do we buy? And when we go through this in our 3-day training, we're actually going to break down the city of Austin to show the specific areas that we want to buy in. We want to focus our money on the areas that are about to double in value, okay? There's a saying by Wayne Gretzky, and he is known as the Great One, right? So he's a hockey player. This is not a hockey town. I am not a hockey player. I'm not a hockey fan, but I love this saying more than anything. He says this. He says, "I don't skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going to be." And never is that thought process more solid and more applicable than for us as real estate investors as we are buying and holding for the long term, right? We want to go to where these values are increasing. And if we focus right, like for example, right where we are, plus or minus a few miles and even going south up to 10 miles even from where we are today, it is really not possible to cash flow unless you are putting a 50% down payment on your property, right? So you want to focus right outside of those areas. So for us, when we first started investing and we were first buying rental properties, we were buying in, for example, the worst parts of 78704, okay? Which are now still not great parts of 78704, but guess what? They've doubled in value, right? We were focusing on buying properties in 78745, which is just south of Ben White. We were focusing on buying properties in 78758 and 78750, so just outside of what I would call the inner loop, right? So the inner loop I would call I-35, Mopac, 183, Ben White, 71, right? So sometimes in order to balance that need for cash flow, that desire for cash flow, or that have to have that cash flow, with buying properties that are doubling in value, you've got to go just right outside of it. You've got to go where the puck is going. So on Sunday at the training, we're actually going to talk a lot about where that puck is going. Now, what we don't want to buy is the stuff that's in what we call the red zones, right? So if you live in Taylor or Elgin or Manor, great places to live, but maybe not great places to own rental properties because the values are not going up as fast of a rate as the values are going up here, for example, in the city of Austin. So the downside of expensive dirt, yep, we talked about this, difficult to cash flow when the land is that expensive. As the price of properties go up, the rents go up, but not at the same pace. And that's the whole truth behind cash flowing here in the city of Austin. And I'll tell you, and my mom my mom is here a little bit with my son tonight. My mom steps in the room, she may have this complaint. So what did we all get in the mail about 2 weeks ago? Our tax bills. Okay, our tax bills. And so my mom has been investing in Austin since the early 1990s. And she has properties in the city of Austin. And the value of many of our properties have doubled and doubled and doubled since the early 1990s. So sometimes when she gets this tax bill, or usually not right when she gets the tax bill, that just kind of sits out there, right? But it's late if you pay it after January 31st, right? So sometime in January, she's going to call me and say, oh my gosh, I've got this one property I've got to pay like over $20,000 in taxes for. And it's messing up its ability to my cash flow is just terrible on this property. I'm like, oh yeah, that's the same property you bought for $100,000 that's now worth over $1 million. Like that property? I said, and I tell her, I said, listen, I talk about like, how you sometimes come to me and are very upset about this. And then I tell her that I sometimes take a poll whenever I'm talking about, this situation. And I'll take it tonight if you guys are okay with that. Is everybody okay with that? Do any of you feel sorry for her? No. Okay, I'm going to go back and report that back to her, right? But yeah, she's I tell her all the time, you're crying all the way to the bank and nobody feels sorry for you. I did a poll tonight, right? But that's sometimes how it looks for us when we are real estate investors and we are building that wealth through owning real estate in the right areas, right? So we call it the green zone. That's where we want to invest as real estate investors. The way most people teach cash flow is, yes, your rent's $1,500, your mortgage is $800 a month. Yay, you've got $700 a month in cash flow. But the truth is you take a closer look and really break down all of the things that take away from your cash flow. It's the mortgage, it's the taxes, it's the insurance, the property management, it's your vacancy, it's your repairs, and sometimes you find that your true cash flow is not really hardly any cash flow at all. And that sometimes gets to be very disappointing for people when they realize, holy cow, I've got a property that I thought was going to cash flow, but as it turns out, it's not cash flowing at the rate that I thought. Now, it is an okay thing. It sucks. I mean, we all want positive cash flow, but it is okay if your property is doubling in value every 10 years, right? You can handle that, right? But if your property, for example, is invested in Taylor, Texas, guess what? It's not doubling in value. So you have the right idea. Let's go invest in real estate, right? Let's get some rental properties, but you had bad execution. You bought in the wrong areas where property values were not going up as much as you want. So short-term rentals do provide a alternative for us to be able to capitalize on our rental properties. And it's a really great strategy, again, in theory, but in execution in the city of Austin, it can be very complex and sometimes it can be very difficult to break into at a more of a massive type of a level, meaning you can definitely get going on individual properties and have maybe one, maybe two, but once you get beyond that, managing all of the city of Austin short-term rental rules can be quite difficult. The advantage of short-term rentals, $250 a night on weekends, $150 a night during the week. I was going to just do some quick math here. So $150 times 5, that's $750, plus another $500. So that's 1 week, that's $800, right? Times 4 weeks, that's $3,200 on a property that you might only otherwise be able to get $2,000 a month in rent, right? So that's a big difference. When we have major events in town, those numbers can change to $3,000 to $7,000. I'll tell you guys that, and I'm not. Please. Do I have y'all's permission to say something that may sound like a brag, but it's just the truth? Is that okay with everybody? When Formula One first came to town, we rented our home for $25,000 for a week. It's like, what? Okay, yes. So we left town. We're not, I mean, I like to drive fast, but I don't need to watch other people drive fast. So yes, no, rent my house. So for some of these big events, you can make an absolute killing. But again, you have to stay within the rules of the city of Austin. There are also expenses when it comes to getting, and I know this is where people get excited, like, oh, I get to decorate a house. Oh, I get to put all this new stuff in there. That sounds fantastic until you start getting those bills and you realize that there is not an immediate return on investment. It might take you several months or maybe even up to a year to get that full return on investment on what you're spending to furnish that property and get it ready. That's what's what?
That's what goodwill is for.
Oh, goodwill. No, your tenants are, the tenants who are paying you, you know, $250 to $1,000 a night do not want your crap from Goodwill.
Believe me, I've done it.
I'd like to see your reviews on Airbnb.com. Okay. The furniture, the kitchenware, paying the utilities. Is somebody like shaving? Okay. I don't know what's happening back there, but okay. No, it's okay. They're gonna be like, it's like Movember is over, so now they're just shaving it off back there. I don't know. You also have to pay a housekeeper to come, right? The housekeeper does 2 jobs for you, right? Number one, they turn the property in between tenants, but if they're going while the tenant is there, they're also providing basically your eyes and ears for what your tenants are doing while they're there. Obviously, property taxes, property management, so there are specific people that will do turnkey property management of your short-term rentals as well, and typically they want to charge you anywhere from 15 to 30% of the rental income that you have coming through. So that's why a lot of people end up managing this themselves. And there's also the hotel tax. So if you're doing a short-term rental, the city of Austin requires that you charge a hotel tax. And a lot of people, the way that they'll do it is they'll charge their rate, and then they'll take out of their rate that tax and pay the tax themselves. Some people have the tenant, if you will, pay that as well. You do have to do some work on staging the property. I got some kind of funny stories about that, but do be aware that your pictures online have to look really good. One of my colleagues, who's also an investor here in Austin, he owns a property on Lake Travis that he does a vacation rental for that particular property, and is several acres actually on Lake Travis. And there was this one opening, and for him, for his pictures, and this is completely false advertising, but it was really just incredible marketing. He painted like a helicopter helipad landing on his property and put that in his pictures. Even though you can't land a helicopter over there, he's like, no, just so like that, and that's overboard. But you do have to make sure this property looks really good. You want to make sure that it sleeps as many people as possible. Sometimes you'll see like, oh, well, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath cottage sleeps 8 uncomfortably, you know. But my friend who also, you know, did the helipad thing, he actually had custom built queen size bunk beds so he could sleep more people. And for him, his big differentiating feature in his advertising, and one of the differentiating features when we did our house, was the fact that his properties sleep 25, but they sleep them uncomfortably. He says it's so funny when the maids go in there to clean. It's like, it's already hard enough to fit sheets on a bed. Like, imagine doubling that, task or that adventure by making a queen size bunk bed and having the maids get up there and do that. But sometimes you'll see pull-out couches, air mattresses, etc. And I will say that this is definitely a survey-driven business, especially if you have a basic, 2-3 bedroom house where you're competing against all these other people that are 2-3, and guess what they're looking at? They're looking at those reviews. So you want to get as many good reviews as possible and as quickly as possible. So one very quick way to do that is, instead of renting at the average price for what's going on in that neighborhood, if you're just getting started, rent just below that so you can get more people renting from you, and you can start get reviews much quicker. Smart locks, great things to be able to use, to be able to change via the internet in between tenants and get the housekeepers in, etc. The housekeepers do love this because basically you provide them much more work than you otherwise would. So there's a whole economy all around this, that's just really fantastic. When you're deciding if a property is a good fit, obviously, is there a good reason for people to want to rent in the area? So obviously, if you have properties that are close to downtown, that people want to be close to the different festivals, some that close to the different events, and many people, it's funny. I like hotels because I like somebody else making me breakfast and somebody else like coming in and cleaning everything. But there are a lot of people who want to be in the short-term rentals just to kind of have that space and all that freedom of space. You do have to be aware, though, that the City of Austin, and the City of Austin has been in multiple lawsuits over the short-term rental guidelines that we have here. And we just got through one series of lawsuits where it actually went to the appellate court level that we'll talk about that just passed this past week. So do be aware that the city does want to be very conservative on the number of short-term rentals and how they regulate those, specifically here in the City of Austin. So whenever you're buying a property for a short-term rental, if that's actually what you are doing, make sure that you're still buying it right, because there's nothing that's going to be more upsetting to you than you buy a short-term rental, you pay full price, you furnish the entire thing, and then you find out that in 2 years that the City of Austin is going to change so that you cannot have that property as a short-term rental.
Is this short-term rental?
Yep, come on in, yeah. So they do change their regulations on a whim. In Fort Worth, for example, they just started to, they had said you can't do them in Fort Worth, but they just started enforcing the fact that you can't do them in Fort Worth anymore. So cities are getting a little bit more strict on some of these different policies. You have to be aware of that. So some of the benefits of short-term rentals, potential to dramatically increase the monthly income of a buy and hold, right? Potential to break even or profit from properties that would normally have negative cash flow. There are people, for example, that I know who live in the Barton Hills Zilker Park neighborhood who have been there for 20 plus years. But when they first bought their house, it was a $200,000 house. And now it's almost $1 million house, and now their property taxes went from $6,000 a year to $28,000 a year. The way that they can afford to stay in that neighborhood is by doing this, using this strategy a few times a year for some of the large events that come to town. So it's a great way to offset even property taxes as well. And then of course, if it's a type 1 rental, meaning it's your homestead, you can you live there between when the tenants live there. For us, when we rented out our property for Formula One, we did it 2 separate times. One time I just stayed with my mom, right? And then another time I went to Las Vegas. So it was like I got to enjoy a vacation too. It was really awesome. With housekeepers there, you can monitor the guests. For us, we've actually even given a driver to some of our tenants to drive them back and forth between the Formula One racetrack. So guess what I get to hear everything. I get to know what's happening at the property. With housekeepers, you get to know what's happening at the properties. It's a great way to be able to make sure that everything's being treated properly. Some of the downsides is it is an active business. So if you think it's like, oh, this is going to be so easy. No, you're going to be very active, and if you've got your property on one of the online sites, you have to be very responsive to anyone who's asking you any questions. If you're not responsive, you're going to potentially lose that renter to someone else. It is taxed at your income tax rate. I mean, that's like, again, no one's feeling sorry for you, right? You got to pay taxes on the income that you earn. And then also be aware that if you are not managing it yourself, right? So if you have a company that's coming in to take the application, to maybe run a background check as an example, to have the cleaners come in, to get it set up, to get everything ready, that they'll typically charge you 18 to 35% of the gross income that's coming in. You also have increased vacancy risk. So the typical occupancy for a short-term rental here in the city of Austin is only about 70%, versus if you are renting, 11 months out of 12, for example, on a regular rental, you've got a much higher occupancy rate, but you're getting higher return on that money, but that is a management process. And also, do be aware that about 10% of guests are a real pain in the butt. They have very high, in some cases, very high expectations of what they are to get and receive, and they will use the power of the review to, in some cases, coerce or manipulate you. I've got several stories about that as well. I had one of my colleagues did a short-term rental on her own property, and the tenants were there for about 4 days. It was a really nice, amazing property, and they did some damage to the property, and not only that, they did a chargeback. Yeah, so yes, it was really quite ugly. So do be aware that not every tenant is going to be a wonderful tenant for you. Do be aware that a certain percentage may be a nightmare for you.
Can you give the tenants reviews too?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
You can, but they can change their profile.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't change the business.
Yeah. yeah, yeah.
What about insurance? Is a attached insurance?
So you will need a special type of insurance for your property. So you need to, if you are doing this as a strategy, you need to let your insurance agent know that this is how you're going to be leasing the property. I've had some colleagues that have gotten cheap. Meaning, as an example, they bought a property that was going to be a buy, fix, and flip, but because of builder's risk insurance is almost double the rate of, for example, a homeowner's policy or a tenant policy, they've said, oh, I want to go with this cheaper policy, and it works out great until something goes terribly wrong, and then they realize that their policy is ineffective, inactive, void, because they got the wrong kind of policy. So you do want to make sure you guys get the right policy for that, and keep your insurance agent in the loop on that for yourself. So Austin regulations. So we have 3 types. So we've got the owner-occupied type 1 in the city of Austin. There's really no limit on how many you can have in a particular neighborhood when it comes to this. But for the type 2, the non-owner occupied properties, city ordinances have placed a cap on the percentage, 3%, and they've created, I think it's like 8 different zones around the city of Austin, and each one of those zones can have a max of 3% come in to do a short-term rental there. Regrettably, the hottest areas in Austin are usually filled up at all times. So do be aware of that. And again, they put in the legislation, City of Austin did, that the type 2 were supposed to be going away as of April of 2022. But last week, the appellate court ruled that no, that's not going to be the case. But that's how high we're going. And do you think the city of Austin is saying, yeah, okay, the appellate court said that we're done with this, so we're going to stop fighting for it? No. So does that put you at some risk? Possibly, yeah.
Question: when you say they think it may be quote unquote going away, does that mean nobody could do?
The original legislation was that a non-owner occupied, they wanted that completely gone by April of 2022. Yeah, so I'll go over, so this is, to me, there's some risk in this strategy, specifically here in the city of Austin, that I want to make sure you guys don't think that it's like the TV show that, oh, you can make all this money and No, the city of Austin's not like the TV show. It's very different. I'll go over what the appellate court said in the ruling that we had about a week ago. You do have to go through an application process if you are going to do this correctly. The application is $572. All of your neighbors are noticed, which makes you Mr. or Mrs. Popular in the neighborhood, right? They get your phone number, they get to call you, they know who you are. You're not going to win any popularity votes when that goes out, that's for sure. You have to register for the hotel occupancy tax and certificate of, there's a couple other things, insurance, certificate of occupancy, etc. And then you have to continually review that permit, which is only about $300, but just want you to kind of be aware of the process. As of November of 2019, the 3rd District of the Texas Court of Appeals struck down 2 parts of the City of Austin's rules for short-term rentals. The court found 2 parts of the city short-term rental rules to be unconstitutional. Number 1, the sunset on the Type 2 class of short-term rentals here, and the limit of how many people can gather in a short-term rental home. Part of the legislation that the city had put forth also had basically curfews and a limit of the number of adults per bedroom and the number between different curfews or time frames. So the city of Austin was like, I want to get in your bedroom and I want to make sure. In fact, one of the, as I was reading some of the comments on this, one of the folks who had a short-term rental, they said in the review that was left for them, because they had to tell, hey, you got to be inside by 10 p.m. So the review was like, I got these reminders. I had to be in bed, not in bed, but it's like how you feel, have to be, not outside having a party after 10 p.m. at night. So, could you imagine this? So it was like, got kind of crushed on some of these different reviews. But many of those rules are made void by that new ruling. Yes?
The other thing is the city will also enforce the noise ordinance.
Yeah.
So if you are going to do a short-term rental, get your own dB meter so that you know whether or not your renters are meeting that, and get an electronic way of turning off your stereos. Because they will call the police, and the police will come up, and if they're sitting in the squad car and they step out and they hold the dB meter up, and it breaks code, you get the ticket, not them.
And correct me, Adolph, but mowing your lawn.
After 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah, like a lawnmower sound breaks that sound.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to kind of give you, kind of make it relative to something, a lawnmower breaks that constantly. So imagine what a party would be doing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This is the kind of changing status that we deal with here in the city of Austin. Now, just to kind of just buy it right, okay? In every property you buy, you want to buy it right just in case there are different legislative changes, and you have to be aware of that specifically as there is such strength behind that in both the neighborhoods and at the city council for what we do. So you don't want to get caught, I bought it wrong, and then the city changed all of their rules, right? So no matter what we do, we always buy it right. Buying and holding in general, whether it's short-term rental or whether it's just a regular rental, is a great way to build wealth as a real estate investor. Don't get hung up on just one strategy, right? Make sure you're open to the other strategies, and make sure you bought it at a point where it would be good to be able to use these other strategies. Again, don't just look at the short-term money that you can make, but how much money you can make from the appreciation, because that is specifically how you really build wealth here in the city of Austin. Guys, any questions about anything? Yeah, yes, yeah.
Couple of
Yeah.
questions, because I've rented out a room as an Airbnb in my own house as a board, and considering doing short-term rentals.
That would be a type 1. Yeah,
Just type of,
yeah.
type 2, do you feel like that market is getting saturated, especially since there are so many areas where they're capped out?
So here's what's interesting. The city of Austin has recently hired a company that
It's basically going to spy on people.
is
and see
spying
if
on
they're
people. Yes.
lying. I've heard
Yes.
that.
So I have heard that there are, from the basic report, that there are about 10,000 short-term rentals in the city of Austin, of which only about 3,500 are registered with the city of Austin. Okay, so as the hammer starts to come down on those, which will be, fines, right? And the fines will be not insignificant. So, for example, the fine in Fort Worth is like $1,000 a day for every day that you, and if you're only getting, $250 to $500 a day, you're just like, yeah, no, this is not going to work. So I imagine the fines will be very hefty. I think that as they start to go after those people, then the number of short-term rentals will probably start to pull back until or unless people are able to get registered. But in many of these zones, again, they're full. It's going to be kind of interesting to see how that works. Yeah.
Long term, over, I know it's impossible to predict the future, but do you think short-term rentals will die out at some point?
I can answer that. I've been here in Austin for a year,
Yeah.
and these 7 new hotels or hotel apartment combinations we built, and some are completed. You're going up against that big lobby. They don't want you in the business.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I would say that initially a lot of the rules around short-term rentals, at least here in Austin, were not motivated by the hotel lobby, but were instead motivated by the neighbors. Okay, but I will say, as that business has grown, I think the hotel lobby is very interested in the results and the legislation that goes around what is acceptable and what is not. And I think the hotel lobby is very sensitive to the fact that some of their market share is being taken by people in this room, right? And they are much more organized and have much more effective lobbyists than some of the individual folks. Even though the legislation, the city of Austin went to the appellate court. These were people hired by citizens here in the city. That's a surprising organization, right? To see that. Like, most people just kind of say, "Oh, well, it's just me, so I can't fight this thing," but they hired attorneys to go after it. I don't know. I think the hotel lobby is much stronger than that. So, and they're looking at it not just at a city level, but at a state level and at a national level.
A 20-story building in a year and a half, Marriott. I watched them put it together. I mean, concrete framing, and they bring the walls in from the factory for them. It's almost done. So the market must be great here in Austin.
The market is great here in Austin.
Yeah.
The hotel occupancy in Austin is actually really high. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but the last time I looked at it, it was really high relative to other cities, and definitely relative to the country. So if you look at Dallas, like they're overbuilt on hotels, versus Austin is underbuilt on hotels. Yeah. Yes, yes, ma'am.
So, when you rented out your house, what did you do with all of your belongings?
I moved my entire closet into the garage, and I put like a double lock on the garage so they were not able to access the garage. So many people who have them will have a specific room that they'll put all of their super valuable stuff in, and they'll have a lock on that. Yeah.
I just say, so, I don't know if we were talking about noise aware, but for the decibel level, there's a company called Noise Aware out of Dallas, and I've used that for my properties actually as insurance to defend that there wasn't a party, right? Because there are little sensors, it's $100 a year, and if there's 5 minutes of consecutive noise that exceeds whatever the decibel level is that you set for your property, I'll get a text alert, right? So then I can address it faster. And so if you have a neighbor that's saying, oh, it's a party property, it's so noisy, you can actually pull the reports. What day was it? What time? What day? And then when you pull the reports, you can see the decibel level, and it wasn't, right? So there's ways to use that product. And then for insurance, Lloyd's of London is the only insurer that will underwrite short-term rental. And I say that because there's a case where Travelers did not cover in California a guest house and the main house, and occasionally she rented the guest house as an Airbnb. A tree fell down on the main house, and when they found out that the guest house had been used as Airbnb, commercial use, they didn't cover the main house, the tree falling on it at all. And
Because
so,
I didn't experience that with our Airbnb. So that's I had a different experience when it comes to insurance. I will say, just on an insurance note, on a side note, I don't know why I mentioned this. I was in a car accident about 3 months ago, and one of the first questions that my insurance agent asked, or the person I was talking to after, was this vehicle part of like a ride share or like Uber or Lyft or something like that? And I'm like, no, but like if it was, like, would that make a difference? And I guess the answer is yes.
so there's something called Proper Insure. It's Proper.insure. There are those in Montana, and they are the most comprehensive insurance policies because it's commercial for when it's being rented, for vacancy because there's you
Yep.
don't have occupancy,
Yep.
and then also there's personal use, right? 'Cause
Yep.
So they write, if you take their policy and you compare it to other ones that support it, right? And oh yeah, we do short-term rental. The problem is there's holes in the covers.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
they don't cover bed bugs, right?
Well,
So
insurance in general is kind of like a hospital gown. You think you're covered, so you turn around. Right? Except that place, the Bozeman place.
You gotta re-notify.
Yeah, but even then, still, you don't even know what you don't know. Well, guys, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you at our next meeting. And happy holidays. Yeah.